The rider came out of the morning haze like a figure carved from the same dust that clung to the far mesas. Jedediah Kane did not hurry. He simply advanced with the slow inevitability of weather, shoulders broad beneath his worn coat, hat shadowing eyes that had learned too much of silence. The frost still clung to the shaded hollows, thin as old lace, and each hoofstep broke it with a soft, brittle whisper. Behind him, the sky brightened to a pale gold, a promise of warmth that had not yet reached the earth. Before him lay the Haraway Ranch, its buildings hunched against the last of the winter winds. The barn roof sagged slightly from storms, survived, and the corral fences leaned with the weariness of long service. Smoke trickled from the chimney of the main house, though even that thin plume seemed wary of rising too high. The place looked tired but enduring, much like the man approaching it. Seated before Jedediah, wrapped in a blanket that still carried a faint scent of sickness and sorrow, was a young girl. Anna's fingers clutched the wool tight beneath her chin, knuckles pale, as if letting go might send her tumbling into the loneliness that had swallowed her world overnight. Her hair, tangled from cold and grief, fell across her eyes. She stared straight ahead without blinking, as though afraid the ranch might vanish if she looked away. A pair of ranch hands halted their work at the sight of Jedediah riding in with a child. Their posture stiffened, and their eyes narrowed in that way of men, accustomed to trouble, arriving in unexpected shapes. One spat into the dust, the other wiped his hands on a coil of rope, waiting. Jedediah acknowledged neither judgment nor curiosity. He simply rode past them, leading the tired horse toward the hitching post by the porch. When he dismounted, he lifted Anna down with surprising gentleness for a man whose hands bore scars like carved riverbed. She stood uncertainly, blanket trailing near the ground. Her eyes were wide, rimmed red from a night that had allowed no rest. Jedediah placed a steady hand on her shoulder, not forcing, not pressing, merely guiding her toward the porch steps. Inside the house, the air smelled of wood smoke, old coffee, and the lingering memory of meals eaten in silence. The floorboards creaked under their boots, and somewhere deeper within, a rocking chair tapped a slow, ghostly rhythm against the frame of the hearth. Jedediah removed his hat, brushing off a thin line of dust before hanging it by the door. The kitchen was dimly lit, its single window clouded with frost. The table bore a half-finished loaf of bread and a tin cup gone cold, as if someone had abandoned breakfast halfway through. Jedediah's life had been a long habit of leaving things half-finished: dreams, conversations, hopes he no longer dared to name. Yet, as he looked at the girl standing in the doorway, something within him recognized that this moment would not be one of those unfinished things. Anna's gaze traveled the room cautiously. Pausing on the rocking chair, she seemed to sense it held stories, perhaps some too heavy for the air to speak aloud. Her fingers tightened around a small braid she had twisted absent-mindedly into the edge of her hair. The gesture was both comfort and plea, a remnant of the touch of the mother she had lost only 2 days before. Jedediah murmured, his voice roughened by disuse rather than displeasure. He gestured toward the hearth, where embers glowed a faint orange beneath ash. The girl obeyed, lowering herself onto a small wooden stool. For a long while neither spoke. He busied himself lighting fresh kindling, coaxing sparks back to life until the fire warmed the room with a soft, orange breath. When the flames rose, they illuminated his features, lines etched deep by wind and grief, a jaw set with the stubbornness of a man who had lost too much to surrender anymore. He looked at the girl, at the way she kept her blanket wrapped tight, as though shielding the last remnants of her old life. He felt, with a quiet ache, the weight of the promise he had not spoken aloud, but had already accepted. The ranch hands entered briefly, hanging their coats and casting curious glances at the child by the fire. Their murmured questions hung unsaid, but Jedediah didn't offer explanations. His silence settled around them like falling dust, and they soon retreated, leaving the room dim and still. Jedediah had endured enough of the world's intrusions. He would not allow prying eyes to disturb this fragile moment. Anna's stomach growled softly, betraying her hunger. Jedediah retrieved a small tin plate and cut her a slice of the stale bread. She took it hesitantly, nibbling as though unsure she had a right to food offered by someone she barely knew. But the warmth of the fire eased the stiffness in her shoulders, and slowly, the fear in her eyes dulled to something gentle, perhaps, or tentative trust. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters and groaning against the walls. Anna flinched, but Jedediah spoke softly. "Wind won't hurt you." It was the closest he came to comfort, yet the words carried the weight of a vow. When the bread was gone, the girl's eyelids drooped. She struggled to keep them open, as if sleep might return her to the nightmare she had just escaped. Jedediah watched her fight it, understanding in his bones the terror of losing everything familiar. He draped an old wool blanket over her shoulders, lifting her carefully onto a small cot near the fire. The rocking chair creaked again, though no breeze touched it. Perhaps the house remembered long ago nights filled with quiet well-being. Perhaps it simply made room for one more soul trying to survive the loneliness of the world. As Anna finally drifted into sleep, Jedediah stared into the flames, thinking of the words he had spoken when he found her beside her mother's still body. "You're coming with me." He had meant it then, out of necessity. Now, watching her fragile breaths ease into rest, He realized it had become something more, an unspoken pledge to protect her, though it meant reopening the doors of a heart he had long since boarded shut. Outside, dawn strengthened into day, and for the first time in years, Jedediah Kane did not feel entirely alone. The cold mornings settled over the Haraway Ranch like a thin shroud, muting sound and color alike. Frost clung to fence posts and glimmered along the edges of the water troughs. The sky, a faded pewter, seemed reluctant to offer the sun to the land below. In this muted world, Anna Rose awoke each day to the soft creak of the old house settling, the scent of smoke rising from the hearth, and the distant lowing of cattle searching for what little grass winter had spared. She moved through the chores, with hesitancy at first, testing the weight of a bucket, learning the difference between the barn's familiar shadows and those cast by fear alone. Jedediah showed her the routines without lecturing. He simply worked, and she followed, mimicking movements until she understood them. The two of them slipped into a rhythm marked by quiet, the soft scuff of boots on packed dirt, the metallic clank of the pump handle, the rustle of hay sliding from his hands to hers. Yet beneath that rhythm lay deeper tides. Anna carried memories stitched into her very breath. As she walked to pastures, the whisper of wind through dry grass felt like her mother's voice, singing lullabies in that gentle, breathy tone that sickness had thinned but never erased. She would pause, shawl clenched around her shoulders, eyes distant. In those moments, grief wrapped itself around her like a second, colder skin. The shawl, her mother's, was a faded blue, threaded with simple white embroidery. It had once been a garment of comfort, draped around her in the evenings when her mother would braid her hair by lantern light. Anna remembered the movements clearly, her mother's fingers, weaving strands with the same care one might use when crafting a prayer. The braids always came out loose, soft against her neck, smelling faintly of herbs and smoke. As the sickness worsened, her mother's touch grew tremulous, yet she still braided Anna's hair. It was her way of holding on. Anna wore the shawl. Now whenever the ache of memory grew too large, she wrapped it tight when the wind rose, clenching its edges as though it were the final tether to a world forever gone. Jedediah watched this quietly. He didn't intrude or press questions upon her. Instead, he recognized in that gesture a reflection of his own pain. His wife, Clara, had once kept a small wooden box filled with sewing needles and scraps of fabric she never found time to turn into quilts. The box still sat on the mantel, undisturbed since the day fever had taken her, its lid closed like a held breath. For years, Jedediah had been unable to touch it, afraid that opening it would unravel what remained of him. He saw that same fragile thread in Anna, the way she held her shawl, the way she looked toward the hills as if expecting the past to crest him like the weather. It stirred something in him, an understanding that did not require words. One morning, as they fed the cattle, Anna asked softly, "Did you ever lose someone to—" Jedediah paused, leaning on the wooden rail. A crow called from a distant cottonwood tree, its cry echoing through the frosty air. "Yes," he answered after a long moment. "Long ago, but not far enough to forget." Anna nodded, accepting the truth without demanding the story behind it. She lifted the hay fork again, and they finished the chore side by side. Throughout the following days, the land itself seemed to mirror their unspoken thoughts. The clouds thickened, gathering above the hills like dark memories reluctant to be forgotten. The air smelled of wet earth and distant rain. Jedediah noticed at first how the horses grew restless, how the birds hid themselves before dawn. The weather was turning, a storm coming, he murmured, as he hammered a loose hinge back onto the barn door. Anna stood nearby, holding the nails, her hand steady despite the chill. "Is it a bad one?" "Likely," he replied. "These hills don't warn without reason." She wrapped the shawl tighter around her shoulders. Jedediah caught the tremor in her breath, though she tried to hide it. The sky loomed low and heavy, a great gray curtain threatening to fall across the valley. He recognized the fear behind her eyes, not fear of the storm, but fear of everything it symbolized: the return of loss, the threat of change, the possibility that even this fragile haven might be swept away. Later that afternoon, as they retreated indoors, the wind began to lash at the eaves. The rocking chair by the hearth creaked, as if waking from slumber, stirring echoes of Jedediah's memories. He could almost hear Clara humming while she prepared supper, her soft voice filling the silence, the way firelight filled the dark corners of the room. Jedediah tended the fire, stirring it until flames rose, bright and strong. Anna sat nearby, legs curled beneath her, watching him with quiet curiosity. She did not speak, but something softened in her posture, a small release of tension, like the first thaw after a long freeze. Later, when thunder muttered over the hills, Jedediah stood at the window, his silhouette tall against the dimming light. Anna approached hesitantly, her shawl hanging crooked around her shoulders. "Does it always storm like this?" she asked. "Not always," he replied, "but storms come. Always have, always will." Anna's gaze turned toward the distant flashes of lightning. "My mother used to say, storms were the sky remembering." Jedediah looked down at her, surprised by the simple poetry of the thought. Remembering what? She swallowed. Everything it tries to forget. He let the words sink in, gentle, aching. "True, you're stronger than you think, Anna," he said quietly. She didn't answer, but she did not withdraw either. Her fingers brushed the window pane, tracing the first raindrop that slid down the glass. In her reflection, Jedediah saw the outline of a spirit refusing to be broken. Even as grief pressed its weight upon her, the storm broke at last with a roar, rain sweeping sideways across the valley. Inside the old house, firelight danced and crackled, illuminating two figures, bound not by blood but by shared shadows, shadows of what they had lost, shadows of what they might yet find. And though neither said it aloud, both understood that survival was no longer a solitary task. By late evening the storm had grown restless, prowling the valley with muttered thunder and rising wind. Jedediah had planned to finish the chores before the worst of it broke, but nature rarely bowed to human timing. The first hard drops of rain struck the barn roof like thrown gravel, just as he and Anna were settling the horses for the night. Within minutes, the downpour became a furious drumming, drowning the world beyond the barn doors. Anna clung to his coat sleeve, her breath quickening as the gale pitched against the boards. Lightning flashed, brilliant and brief, illuminating the rafters like a skeleton of beams suspended against the storm's blue-white fury. Shadows leaped across the walls, long, strange shapes that stirred old fears in both child and man. Jedediah set a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Storm can't break these walls," he said, though the reinforcements sounded more like a vow than a simple reassurance. The horses stamped nervously, their breath pluming in the cold air. He moved down the row of stalls, murmuring the low, even words of comfort that had always come easier with animals than with people. A sudden crash of thunder rolled through the valley, rattling the barn door on its iron hinges. Anna flinched. The lantern on the hook swung in frantic arcs, sending waves of firelit gold across the hay-strewn floor. For a moment, Jedediah feared the storm might tear the doors clean away. Then another sound, faint at first, nearly lost in the storm's roar. Hoofbeats, urgent, fast. Nearing Jedediah froze, listening. Hoofbeats in such weather were no small matter. No sane traveler rode into a storm like this unless driven by necessity or danger. The barn doors heaved open with a blast of wind that snuffed the lantern. Flame, rain slashed inward in cold, stinging sheets. A horse burst through the opening, its dark mane plastered to its neck, its flanks heaving. Astride, it was a woman wrapped in a soaked deer-hide shawl, her braids trailing like dark ropes down her back. She jumped down before the horse had fully halted, landing lightly despite the mud and the storm's assault. Jedediah pulled the doors shut against the wind with a grunt, throwing the latch into place. When he turned, lantern relit and held aloft, the stranger stood facing him. Her features were strong and carved by hardship, yet her gaze held a calm that unsettled more than the storm. "Teanita," she said, tapping her chest with two fingers. Her voice carried the steady cadence of someone who had traveled far and spoken little. Jedediah nodded. Jedediah Kane. He looked her over not with suspicion, but with the wary respect due any traveler who arrived in such a storm. "You need shelter." She inclined her head, water dripping from her shawl. "Storm pushed me off the ridge. Bad path. Worse men." At the word men, her expression darkened. Jedediah waited for her to continue, sensing the weight behind it. "Bandits," she said simply. 3 days now, they moved through the valley, burned a homestead by the southern creek, took horses, took worse. Anna edged closer to Jedediah, eyes wide. The stranger's words stirred unease in her small frame, yet something about the woman's presence also drew her a quiet steadiness, a certainty she had not often seen in adults consumed by fear. Jedediah gestured toward the empty stall near the lantern light. "Your horse can rest here." He took the reins from her, noting the animal's trembling exhaustion. As he began rubbing down the horse's neck with a dry cloth, Teanita stepped near Anna. "You are not afraid of me," she observed, her voice gentle in contrast to the storm's rage. Anna shook her head slowly. "You ride in storms," she said. "Only brave people do that." Teanita's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Bravery is sometimes only another word for having no choice." Jedediah's gaze flicked toward them, noting how Anna's posture had eased, how the stranger's presence calmed her more effectively than any comfort he'd managed. The barn, with its creaking beams and shuddering boards, suddenly felt less like a place of fear and more like the hollow of a shared refuge. As the storm intensified, they gathered near the lantern's glow. Rain hammered the roof like relentless fists. Thunder rolled in deep, trembling waves. Lightning illuminated the barn's interior again and again, each flash revealing Teanita's serene composure, Jedediah's guarded strength, and Anna's fragile hope nestled between them. Jedediah leaned against a beam, arms crossed. "You're certain these men are headed north?" he asked. Teanita nodded. "They look for ranches with weak walls, houses where men are away. They watch the smoke of chimneys." "Vultures," Jedediah muttered. "Hungry ones." She replied. Their eyes met across the lantern light to souls, marked by loss, shaped by endurance. Though from different worlds, they recognized the same weary resolve in one another, the same understanding that survival often depended on choosing whom to trust under the worst skies. Anna spoke softly. "Will they come here?" Teanita crouched beside her, voice low and steady. "Not tonight. Storm keeps even evil men close to their fires. But you are right to ask." Storms show what people truly are. Jedediah exhaled slowly, feeling the truth of that settled into his chest. He had long believed danger could be faced alone, that silence and hard earth were shield enough. But looking at Tyanita dripping rainwater, mud streaking her trousers, strength radiating from her like heat from a banked ember, he realized how foolish solitude could be. He needed allies. The valley needed unity. And the girl beside him needed more than a solitary man with old griefs chasing his heels. The storm raged long into the night, wind howling as though scouring the past from every rafter. Yet inside the barn, a fragile bond formed, quiet as the lantern flame, but warmer than the hearth in Jedediah's house. Anna leaned against Jedediah, eyelids heavy. Her small hand rested atop his. Trusting, Tyanita sat across from them, watching with an expression softened by understanding. And as thunder rolled over the hills like a memory unwilling to fade, Jedediah Kane accepted a truth he had long avoided. He could not face what lay ahead alone. The storm passed, but its echoes lingered in the valley for days, puddles that reflected broken skies, branches stripped bare by the wind, and an unsettled quiet that clung to the ranch like breath on cold glass. Life resumed its slow rhythm, though tension simmered beneath each routine. Anna rose early with the frost, learning how to glide through chores with tentative confidence. She carried buckets nearly her own weight, swept the barn aisle with determined strokes, and checked the hens with the seriousness of a seasoned ranch wife. Yet every so often, she would pause mid-task and glance toward Jedediah, as if silently measuring the distance between them, gauging whether he might vanish like others had before. His tall frame, moving through the morning haze with unhurried steps, offered little reassurance. He was dependable in action, but his silence held its own mysteries. Jedediah felt those glances. They settled on him, like questions he wasn't sure he had the language to answer. He didn't blame her. Trust was not something easily rebuilt on soil already salted by loss. Tyanita remained at the ranch for several days, repairing her gear and waiting for the trails to dry enough for safe travel. Her presence stirred ripples among the ranch hands. They spoke in hushed murmurs when they thought Jedediah couldn't hear, about her braids adorned with small carved beads, about the quiet power in her stance, about the rifle slung across her back, marked with unfamiliar symbols. Prejudices ran deep in places where the land itself seemed carved with old divisions. Jedediah heard the mutterings, but he didn't interfere, not yet. He was still weighing his own thoughts, whether harboring her brought danger or protection, whether fear could be allowed to shape decisions that should be grounded in decency. The world was growing harder. So were the hearts of men. He did not want his to follow. In the evenings, the three of them settled into a kind of companionable silence around the hearth. The fire cast warm halos across the room, catching on Anna's hair as she braided it with careful fingers, just as her mother once had. Jedediah watched without comment, recognizing the ritual as a tether to memory. He sharpened his tools by the firelight, his whetstone rasping in a steady rhythm as images of Clara drifted through his mind like woods. Her laughter, soft and lilting, had once filled these walls. Now only the echoes remained, faint but persistent. Across from them, Tyanita sat cross-legged on the floor, carving delicate shapes into the worn stock of her rifle. Anna had once asked what the markings meant, and Tyanita had replied in her calm, rippling tone: protection, vigilance, healing, stories that keep the heart steady. Anna stared at the symbols with quiet wonder, as though they held secrets of a world larger than any map could show. It was during one of these evenings, when the fire burned low and the night smelled of pine smoke and cooling earth, that Anna finally spoke her fear aloud. Jedediah, she said softly, fingers halting mid-braid, are you going to send me away? The question cut through the room like the crack of a dry twig underfoot. Jedediah looked up, startled by the tremor in her voice. Tyanita paused her carving but did not intrude her stillness, a shield granting them space. Jedediah set down his knife and whetstone. Why would you think that? Anna swallowed, eyes fixed on the glowing embers. Because everyone leaves, or makes me leave. She tugged the shawl closer around her shoulders. My mother said we would find a home, but then her voice broke, and she pressed her lips together until the tremor eased. I don't want to be sent away to another place that doesn't want me. Jedediah leaned forward, elbows braced on his knees, searching for words that didn't come easy. Anna, he said slowly, you're here because I chose for you to be here. Storm or no storm, that hasn't changed. But what if I'm in the way? She whispered. You're not. His voice carried a weight that made her look up. This land can be lonely, too lonely. A man starts thinking the world's done with him. Then someone shows up who needs a place to stand. Maybe that's what keeps a place alive. He hesitated, the fire crackling between them. You're not in my way. If anything, you'd give me reason to keep going. It was the closest he'd come to revealing the hollow he'd been carrying since Clara's death. Anna seemed to sense that, for she didn't rush to speak. Instead, she nodded once small, solemn, then continued, braiding her hair. Her shoulders eased, though the fear did not vanish entirely. Trust was not an immediate thing. It was woven slowly, like the braids in her hair, like the repairs on the old house, like the bond building between them. Later, when Anna had drifted to sleep near the hearth, Tayanita looked at Jedediah with quiet appraisal. "You speak truth," she said. He shrugged, uncomfortable under the weight of praise. "Only what needed saying." "Truth always needs saying," she replied. "It is the one thing storms cannot wash away." Jedediah studied the carved symbols on her rifle. "You believe that?" "Yes." She traced a fingertip along the grooves. "Protection begins with honesty. Healing, too." Her words lingered in the warm air, long after she returned to her carving. Outside, the night deepened. Coyotes called from distant ridges, their voices drifting like mournful hymns across the valley. Inside the house, the fire ebbed to glowing coals, painting soft amber halos on the faces of those gathered near it. The tension in the air had not vanished, but it had transformed. It was no longer the brittle strain of fear or prejudice. It had become the tension of things shifting, of bonds quietly forging, of wounds beginning to knit beneath the surface. Jedediah gazed at the sleeping girl, then at Tayanita's steady focus, and felt a subtle but undeniable shift in his own heart. For the first time in years, the house did not feel like a monument to lost. It felt like the beginning of a home, reorganizing itself timidly, imperfectly, but undeniably, beneath the shared weight of three souls, learning how to trust again. It started with the faintest scent of burning sagebrush, thin, acrid thread of smoke carried on the late afternoon wind. Anna noticed it first while gathering kindling by the fence line. She paused, nose twitching, her young face sharpening with concern. When she turned toward the southern pasture, she saw the smoke coiling upward like a dark serpent, writhing against a sun already leaning toward dusk. "Jedediah," she shouted, dropping the kindling. "There's fire." Her voice cracked across the yard. Jedediah emerged from the barn in 2 long strides, followed by Tayanita, who was already scanning the horizon. The smoke thickened as wind rolled low over the hills. Lightning must have struck a stump earlier. Jedediah muttered, jaw set. "Wind's feeding it now." Without waiting for instruction, Anna dashed toward the toolshed, grabbing the heavy canvas blankets Jedediah used for smothering small blazes. Her arms trembled under the weight, but she didn't let go. Not this time. Not after everything she had already endured. Jedediah mounted his sorrel mare. "Anna, stay close to the sheds." "No," Tayanita interrupted, her tone sharp but steady. "She helps. She knows this land now, and she is not afraid." Anna swallowed hard, surprised by the faith in Tayanita's voice. Jedediah hesitated only a fraction of a moment before nodding. "Stay with her," he said to the scout. "Keep her away from the thick smoke." Then he rode off, the horse bounding toward the ridge, kicking dust into the rising haze. The fire crackled like a monstrous heartbeat when they reached the southern slope. Flames leaped through dry grass, licking the air with hungry tongues. The smoke curled around them, stinging eyes and filling lungs with the metallic taste of fear. Jedediah steered the cattle away from the encroaching blaze, shouting commands over the roaring wind. The herd thundered across the field, hooves pounding with the urgency of survival. Anna and Tayanita worked along the edges of the fire. Tayanita directed her with crisp gestures. "Move here, hit the flames there, stay ahead of the sparks." Anna dragged the blankets through the dirt, slamming them over small flames. Her arms shook, but she refused to stop, sweat streaking her brow, smoke clinging to her braid like a dark veil. The world narrowed to heat, effort, and breath. A burning branch collapsed near Anna, scattering sparks. She stumbled backward, heart hammering. Before fear could paralyze her, Tayanita was there, one hand gripping her shoulder, grounding her. "You are strong enough," she said, eyes fierce and calm. "Fire tests us all, but we decide what survives afterward." Anna straightened, nodding, and struck the next flare-up with renewed determination. As the sun dipped behind the hills, the wind shifted, carrying the smoke eastward. Jedediah galloped back toward them, shirt plastered with soot, face streaked with ash. Together, man, child, and scout, they pressed the fire from 3 sides, forcing it into a narrow corridor of stone where it finally sputtered, hissed, and died in a smoking heap. Exhausted, they stood panting as night wrapped around them. The stars emerged faintly through the haze. The southern pasture was charred but alive, saved by blistered hands, quick thinking, and a unity forged in flame. Hours later, back at the ranch, the fire in the hearth crackled warm and golden, a comforting echo of the inferno they had battled. The 3 huddled close, wrapped in blankets, bruised and smoky, but safe. Anna leaned against Jedediah's side, the blanket pulled around her small shoulders, her mother's shawl draped over her back, smelling faintly of lavender and memory. Jedediah rested his hand gently on the top of her braid, a simple gesture, but one that spoke more than any words he could muster. Tayanita sat across the hearth, easing sore muscles and cleaning the soot from her hands. The firelight carved warm copper glints across her features, softening the lines carved by years of wandering. "Tonight reminds me of a story," she said, her voice low and even. "A tale my grandmother told beside the winter fires." Anna perked up, eyes bright despite exhaustion. Jedediah glanced at the scout, curiosity tugging at him. Tayanita continued, gaze fixed on the flames. "There was once a woman who grieved the loss of her son. He was brave, but taken too soon. She wandered far into the mountains, searching for a way to mend her broken heart. She met a healer who told her, "Grief is a fire. If you run from it, it burns you from behind. If you walk through it, it warms you from within." She paused, letting the crackle of the hearth fill the silence. "The woman walked through it," Tanita finished softly. "She carried her memories like embers, painful but glowing. And in time, she learned that love lives longest when shared with those still breathing." Anna's eyes glistened. "Your grandmother, was she the woman?" Tanita smiled, a small wistful curve. "In many ways, yes. And in many ways, no. Stories belong to us all, even when they come from one person." Jedediah felt something shift in the quiet. Anna rested her head on his shoulder, trusting, unguarded. Tanita's story wrapped around them like the warmth of the flames, a reminder that grief was universal. And so was healing. He looked at the girl beside him, small but unbreakable, clutching her mother's shawl with fingers still smudged from smoke. She had faced fire today, real fire, and had not run. Courage wasn't loud in her. It was steady and persistent, the kind that grew roots. Jedediah let out a slow breath. "I'm proud of you, Anna." She blinked, startled. Then her face softened into a shy, genuine smile, one that carried hope instead of fear. Outside, the night air was cool and still. The threat had passed. The ranch, though scarred in places, stood strong. Inside, the fire in the hearth burned bright, its glow dancing across their faces, binding them in warmth. Jedediah realized then that protection meant more than a roof overhead or food on the table. It meant staying when the world tried to pull people apart. It meant choosing to stand between someone and every new storm. Anna drifted to sleep against him, shawl tucked under her chin like a promise kept. He watched the embers pulse, a quiet vow forming in his heart. He would not leave, not now, not ever. Morning broke slow and pale over the valley, the kind of dawn that seemed hesitant to disturb the land after so many days of smoke and unease. Thin beams of gold filtered through the lingering haze, casting long shadows across the Haraway ranch. Jedediah stood on the porch with a mug of cooling coffee in hand, watching dust rise from the road. It was not a rider he recognized, nor a ranch hand returning early from patrol. It was a wagon modest, but marked with the seal of the territorial courts. A traveling judge. Jedediah set his cup down. Behind him, Anna stepped onto the porch, shawl wrapped close, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. Tanita appeared last, her posture calm but alert. The wagon rolled to a halt, and the Jajalene, weather-worn man with silver threading through his dark hair, dismounted with a slow, deliberate grace. "Jedediah Kane," he called, voice firm but respectful. "I've ridden far to gather testimony. Bandits struck north of here 2 nights past. We're told you and your companions may have seen signs of their passing." Jedediah nodded. "We can speak to what we witnessed." Inside the ranch house, they gathered at the long wooden tablets, surface scarred by years of meals, tools, and the weight of unspoken burdens. The judge opened a ledger. His expression held neither threat nor comfort. He bore the steady neutrality of a man whose duty lay in truth alone. Tanita spoke first, carefully recounting the tracks she had found days earlier, horses shod unevenly, a dropped cartridge, a torn scrap of cloth caught on sagebrush. She described the direction the tracks had bent toward, the movement of wind that carried smoke far earlier than the fire on their ridge. Jedediah followed, explaining the missing cattle, the suspicious riders he'd glimpsed on the distant ridge just before the storm. When Anna's turn came, she swallowed hard, hands twisting in her lap. Her voice wavered only once before steadying. "I saw them too," she said softly, "men with dark scarves over their faces. My mama always said to look at how a man rides if you want to know his heart. They rode like they weren't afraid to break things." The judge rode swiftly, his brow furrowed. "And you swear this is truth?" Anna lifted her chin, courage flickering in her young eyes. "I don't know how to lie about something that wrong." Silence followed. The judge closed the ledger with a decisive thud that echoed through the room like a door sealing shut. "Your testimony will bring justice," he said. "Those men have taken enough from this valley. Now the law will take something from them." Outside, he mounted his wagon and tipped his hat. Jedediah watched him disappear down the road, dust trailing behind like the final breath of a long ordeal. The afternoon carried a strange stillness. No smoke curled from the hills. No thunder growled beyond the plains. It was as if the land itself exhaled. Anna retreated into her small room. When she returned, she carried her mother's wedding shawl, the fine, ivory-colored one that had survived dust, sickness, and the harshness of her short life. She draped it over her shoulders slowly, as though afraid it might finally crumble. Jedediah watched her with quiet understanding. The shawl glowed faintly in the soft light, its embroidered edges shimmering like the last remnant of a story closing itself. "You sure you want to wear that today?" he asked gently. She nodded. I think I need to. One last time." Tanita stepped forward, her expression unreadable but kind. "Cloth carries memory," she said, "but memory also lives within us. You do her honor by walking forward." Anna's gaze flickered with emotion. Grief, yes, but also gratitude. A wind drifted across the yard as Tanita saddled her painted horse. Jedediah approached her, boots crunching in the gravel. "You'll be leaving, then," he said quietly. "Your valley is safer now," she replied. "There are others who need watching over, others who must face storms of their own." He extended his hand. "You have my thanks." She clasped his forearm firmly. "And you have my respect." Few men choose the harder path when the easier one beckons. Her eyes softened as she looked toward Anna. "Take care of your heart," she said to the girl. "It is stronger than you know." Anna hesitated, then hurried forward to embrace her. The hug was brief but sincere, a silent transfer of strength between them. With a final nod, Tayanita rode off toward the open land. Disappearing into the tall grass and late afternoon sun, Jedediah turned toward the barn, where his horse waited saddled. Anna approached slowly, the shawl flowing behind her like a pale banner. The shadows of the doorway stretched long beside them, merging the past with the uncertain road ahead. He bent slightly to meet her gaze. "You don't have to come, Anna. You can stay with the ranch hands while I ride to town and settle things." "Or no," she said softly but firmly. "I choose to go with you, if you'll have me." The words struck him with quiet force. Not desperate, not fearful, chosen. He nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "Then we ride together." He lifted her into the saddle before mounting behind her. She sat straight, hands gripping the worn leather horn. The shawl drifted around them, catching the breeze like a farewell wave dot as they rode out. The land opened wide endless plains, brushed with gold, the sky arching high and soft overhead. The ranch shrank behind them, not as a place abandoned, but as a home they would return to. Changed, Jedediah felt the familiar ache of memory, the lingering shadow of his late wife. But, for the first time in years, the ache did not hallow him. It warmed him, like embers preserved after a long night. Ready to kindle something new, Anna leaned back slightly, trusting his steady presence. He adjusted his hold, protective but gentle. Two silhouettes moving across the valley, no longer alone, no longer lost. The wind carried the scent of dust and sage. The sun dipped low, painting their path in amber light. And with each hoofbeat, the past settled behind them like the dust of the trail, quiet, soft, and finally, at peace. They rode homeward, together, toward whatever the next dawn would bring.